And now, a thought from Geico Motorcycle.
It took 15 minutes to take a spirit animal quiz online.
Please be the cheetah. Please be the cheetah.
And learn your animal isn't the cheetah, but the far less appealing blobfish.
Oh, come on.
To add insult to injury, you could have used those 15 blobfish minutes to switch your motorcycle insurance to Geico.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on motorcycle insurance.
Welcome to the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast, episode number 15. If it can be written or thought, it can be filmed. Stanley Kubrick.
Broadcasting from a dark, windowless room in Hollywood when we really should be working on that next draft. It's the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast, showing you the craft and business of screenwriting while teaching you how to make your screenplay bulletproof. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, my screenwriters, to another episode of the Bulletproof Screenplay Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Now, today's show is sponsored by Bulletproof Script Coverage. Now, unlike other script coverage services, Bulletproof Script Coverage actually focuses on the kind of project you are and the goals of the project you are. So we actually break it down by three categories: micro budget, indie film market, and studio film. There's no reason to get coverage from a reader that's used to reading tentpole movies when your movie is going to be done for $100,000. And we wanted to focus on that at Bulletproof Script Coverage. Our readers have worked with Marvel Studios, CAA, WME, NBC, HBO, Disney, Scott Free, Warner Brothers, The Blacklist, and many, many more. So if you need your screenplay or TV script covered by professional readers, head on over to covermyscreenplay.com. Now today, guys, on the show, we have Jeff Bollow from Fast Screenplay. He has also written a book called Writing Fast, How to Write Anything in Lightning Speed. Now, Jeff's been he's an independent producer. He's also an actor and a screenwriter. And as an actor, he was in one of my favorite 90s, borderline 80s, 90s film called Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, starring a very young Christina Applegate. And it was, such a fun movie back in the day. I'll put a link on it in the show notes if you guys haven't seen it. It's super fun. But I wanted to bring Jeff on the show because he wrote this amazing book, and he has this system called the Fast Screenplay, which is about your setup. There's 7 distinct phases. There's the setup, there's the focus, there's the apply, strengthen, tweak, alignment, and payoff. And the setup is setting yourself up to write a screenplay any producer can use. And that's his big point is you write for a producer. You write for the movie to get made, as opposed to just writing just for the sake of writing, or just writing in a vacuum like maybe it'll get sold, maybe it won't get sold, who knows. But his ideas are really interesting, and I want him to come on the show to kind of talk about his method and his style of how he writes a screenplay. And it's been very successful for a lot of people. And like all different systems, no one has the magic bullet on this is the absolute way to be successful as a screenwriter. So you always got to listen to everybody and listen to everybody and listen to other people's ideas and see what you can come out with it. So that's why I wanted to get Jeff on the show, because his techniques are very interesting, and that he's going at it as a fast process also intrigued me, because I know screenwriting, it can be a little bit laborious, to say the least. So I don't want to keep mumbling along. So without further ado, here is my interview with Jeff Bollow. Jeff, thank you so much for taking out the time to jump on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, Jeff, tell me how you got into the film business in the first place. This crazy business.
How I got into the film business? Well, I was a little kid, and I was dreaming of being a movie star, and I decided to pursue acting, and I started acting when I was about 12.
Okay.
So I grew up in LA, so it's been around me all my life, and just started pursuing that. Got some work as a kid actor, and fell in love with the filmmaking process, and started making my own short films, and got bit by the travel bug and moved to Australia, where I tried to make an independent film with a friend of mine. We spent about 7 years trying to make this indie film.
Oh, man. I've heard that story before.
Yeah, I can imagine. We ended up abandoning it in post-production because by the time we had gotten near to finishing, it had sort of already become a bit obsolete. Some of the references, like structural story-based references, were out of date and that kind of thing. And we sort of went, okay, well, that was our film school, I guess, more or less. So
that was a long film school.
Yeah, very long film school, painful film school too.
I've been in post for about 20 years, and I've seen so many of those kind of stories. But I've never heard 7 years. 7 years is the record now. I've heard 3. We've been doing this for 3 or 4 years, and we're like, oh man, that must just be painful.
Well, we were doing it for 3 or 4 years, and then that sort of drags on, because at a certain point, I mean, the biggest problem that you run out of money, and you got to keep. You got to keep working to generate the money to pay the bills and keep it going. So it just, it becomes weekends and evenings and,
it's
vacation.
It's like a really bad cocaine habit. You just have to keep working to pay for the drug, but that's not going anywhere yet, but I have to keep paying it's like it's a vicious cycle.
I've never had that habit, so I can't.
Me neither, sir. I've only seen Scarface, so this is where I'm getting my reference from.
From movie references, I think that's true.
Now, when you say you were an actor, you were in one of my favorite movies growing up.
Oh.
Don't tell mom the babysitter's dead.
There you go. I said the immortal, ridiculous line, "Park it yourself, Metallica breath."
Yes, it's I'm sure a highlight.
I can't tell you. I tried to get them to change that line, and the director was pretty adamant. So I went, all right. And it turns out, there you go. It's my one memorable thing from 5-10 years of being an actor. So
and that came out in the late 80s or early 90s? I think it was.
Well, it came out. We shot it in 1990. It came out in 91 at basically the same time as Terminator 2.
Right.
So
and it was actually it was a big hit for what it was. It was it was a relatively low budget that they made it on, so it certainly made its money back, just barely, I guess, at the box office. But then it was co-financed by HBO Films, so HBO just ran it and reran it on HBO in the early days, and so it sort of developed this, I think, cult following over the years through that largely. And it's bizarre to me that people still remember that film today. Oh no! Well, I mean, I was working at a video store in '91, so I'm very well aware of that movie. And of course, like everybody else at that time in history, I had a crush on Christina Applegate. So
yes, I had a crush on Christina Applegate too.
Yeah, and she was still just the married with children girl, and she just had and she ran with it with that movie. So, sorry, I don't mean to geek out, guys. About don't tell mom the babysitter's dead. By the way, if you haven't seen it and you're a '90s kid, you should definitely watch it. It
really does capture that era pretty well. I think it's there's something tangible about it. Like texturally, it's interesting. It's there. I mean, it's not not the greatest movie of all time, but it's fun. It
still had some of the 80s stank on it, but it was in a full 90s movie, but it had a little bit of 80s stank slapped on. Just all those movies in 90, 91, 92, they still had that 80s.
Well, I remember somewhere someone had called it the last 80s teen comedy. So even though it was made in the 90s.
No, that makes perfect sense, actually. That makes actually perfect. Yes, like I always said, 1980, that's not really the 80s. 80s didn't start till maybe 81, 82.
Exactly.
You still got the stank of the 70s laying around.
Right.
So.
We haven't figured out what the 90s are yet, so we're still doing the 80s thing.
Exactly. So you moved to Australia. I have to ask you, how's the film business down there? Like, how is it to make movies and run a production company and stuff?
The film industry in Australia the thing with Australia is it's a much smaller country. So there's only, compared to 300 something million people in the US, there's 25 to 30 million in Australia. So everything gets scaled down almost by factor of 10, kind of a thing, simply because there's, the audience, the homegrown audience isn't big enough to sustain the kinds of budgets that are made from Hollywood films, that sort of thing. So it almost, the industry there almost has an indie feel throughout, except that there's this government funding sort of mechanism woven into the DNA of the industry. So the way screenwriters, for example, think about making money in Australia is they think about getting funding from the government to, $10,000 for a draft sort of thing, so
you're kidding me. Really?
It's
really?
kind of that way. So everyone is like competing, I guess, for government dollars,
Right.
which is, disconcerting for someone like me who comes from LA and has this sense of, I want to make, commercially viable films that have artistic merit and all that sort of thing. So to have to sort of fit into that, it's difficult. So what ends up happening is you've got writers who are writing for something other than what someone like me is looking for, generally, by and large.
Right.
So the great challenge, I think, of the Australian film industry is, the film industry anywhere, I guess, is making a living while you're trying to make your films. But there, I think, because it's smaller, the upside of it is also smaller. So it doesn't attract as many people. So it's a thinner field in which to play, I guess. They're very serious. They take it very serious. There's some great quality, particularly in the performing arts there, which makes for a very robust community. But it's because it's a little small and a little parochial. It's hard to build something and sustain it. They have distribution troubles, and it's the Australian audience often doesn't necessarily embrace Australian film because it's, first of all, the marketing dollars spent by the studios and the Hollywood films, all the American films are coming down there with these enormous budgets and just blanketing press coverage. So the little Australian film, even in Australia, has a real hard time getting noticed and getting heard. And in some ways, it really reflects the indie arena across the board.
Got you. So, in other words, if you made an indie film in Australia, you would have to bring it to Sundance to be big again in Australia.
Kind of, yeah. It's a little ironic that way. It's definitely true. The films that have had breakout success really actually do succeed at overseas film festivals first.
Right.
So,
well, I remember Crocodile Dundee was the biggest hit in Australia for a long time.
It was, but that's sort of a U.S. Australian co-production.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's similar with things like Baz Luhrmann films,
Sure.
Australia or, Moulin Rouge or those kind of, like, it's, yes, technically Australian, but most of the money comes
US.
from the U.S.
Of course.
So that if you're talking about truly Australian homegrown product, it's, the budgets are smaller and they're more niche, and it's harder to find that audience. So it's a struggle. It's a real struggle.
And now, do you work in New Zealand as well? Do you jump in back and forth?
Yeah. So when I moved down there, I ended up migrating to New Zealand. So I lived in New Zealand for many years, and I've directed TV there, and I've acted in TV commercials and shows and stuff there. So it's then you're scaling it down to a population of 4 million people.
Right. It's even smaller than Australia.
Yeah. So one of the big problems, and I think I think it gives me an interesting perspective on all this, is if your market is small, in order to make something at a larger scale or something that resonates with audiences wider, you really have to have almost a global perspective on it rather than the perspective of the local. The challenge of that is that we want to see local stories. And so if it's that whole idea of stories with universal themes, right? Like universal themes are best expressed through specific local,
Right.
If you tell a local story that resonates culturally, locally, there's a great film, I don't know if you ever saw it, out of New Zealand called Whale Rider.
Oh, yeah, of course. It's a wonderful film.
Fantastic film. It's so very specifically New Zealand. It's very specifically the Maori culture. It's very specifically, it's small and indie, but it's themes that resonate, right? So it's the parent-child relationship and the where do I fit in my culture now that the culture isn't quite what it once was, and all those kinds of things. We can relate to that. Whether we're in Australia, whether we're in the US, we can relate to that story, but yet it's a very specific local story. I think that's a great takeaway for filmmakers.
Now, what drew you to kind of get into the storytelling aspect and the screenwriting aspect of things?
Well, when I was in Australia, and I had a good friend of mine down there, and I were wanting to make a film, and I was waiting for him to get his, I don't know if I can use the word shit, but waiting for him to get his ass
stuff,
gear,
his stuff together,
Exactly. So, I was waiting and I just got very frustrated. I felt at a certain point that I was like, I grew up in LA, so to be sitting in New Zealand going, what am I doing here?
Right.
At a certain point, it's like, I just need to write something and we need to go try to make it. So I did that. I don't particularly love writing. I think I'm good at it, but it's not where my passion lies. My passion is in directing and producing. And so, so when we were in about 3 or 4 years into post-production on that film, that we ultimately abandoned, I started looking for other scripts, and I put out a call. I was back in Australia at this point, put in a call Australia-wide looking for screenplays, and got in probably about 300 scripts that, knowing how hard it was for me to write, I committed to reading every word of every script that came in.
Oh my gosh.
And I will never do that again, because it quickly becomes apparent that there's most people don't know what they're doing.
Of course. Here in LA as well.
Here in LA as well. Absolutely.
They don't have a monopoly on not knowing what they're doing. LA is very much the same way.
Exactly. But as you start reading this stuff, you look at it from the perspective of the reader and the perspective of someone going, I want to make a film. Let me see if there's something that I can find out there, because I don't want to have to write something again. You start to see all the problems, and you start to realize that I can get 30 pages in and realize there's no point in reading any further. And then as you read more, you go, I really only need to read 10 pages, and I don't need to go any further. And eventually I realized that I can actually determine whether or not a script is legitimately viable in about 2 sentences. Like, it's really that easy to determine. And it's now cut to 16 years later, and my production company has a submissions form on the website, and we've had submissions from all around the world, over 25,000 submissions. And literally I have found about 20 projects. And you go, okay, at a certain point, it's pretty much, you can, and this is the reason producers don't want to hear the pitch. This is the reason people don't want to read your screenplay, is because 99.9% of them are awful. So it's not awful, but just unusable. So not
a viable product.
They're not viable. And even if they are viable, they're not viable for that producer at that moment. Right. So ultimately, they're kind of right to say, I'm not going to read your material, which creates that catch-22. So here I am in Australia saying, well, okay, but I need scripts. I mean, we need, what are we going to make? I don't want to sit down and, so I have this ambition to start an independent film studio that would make between 3 and 6 films a year. This was my goal back 16, 17 years ago as well. And if you've seen my TED Talk, those are the kinds of films that I want to make, right? So I had this sort of big vision for changing the future, and not changing the future, but preparing people for what's to come. Right. I want to make movies that inspire us for what I believe to be a radically different future that's on its way to us.
So can you talk a little bit, because I loved your TED Talks. One of the reasons why I reached out to you, I absolutely loved your TED Talk. Can you talk a little bit can you share a few of the points in your talk to the audience?
Well, so the basic idea is that there's this notion of exponential change. It's really hard for people to wrap our brains around what exponential change means. But the simplest way, I think, to grasp it is technology increases exponentially. So if you have a computer and you use that computer to build a better, faster computer, it's going to double the output of it, right? So, but then that new computer, building a new computer, will double the output again. So rather than going step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4 to step 5, you go step 1 to step 2 to step 4 because you've doubled, to step 8 because you've doubled, 10,
and go on and on and on.
Exactly. But this is the nature of progress. This is the nature of change. And I believe that the future is going to look radically different to today by the fact that everything is changing on this exponential scale. So we're early in the exponential curve, which is why it doesn't seem all that groundbreaking. But if you actually go back and look at Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, like many things about society are quite the same, but it's a dramatically different world that we live in.
Oh, and Jesus, yeah.
And it's going to get extremely dramatically different from here as, things like...
well, look, I'll just use a perfect example. Since I live in LA, I just discovered, maybe I'm old, but I just discovered Amazon Now.
Okay.
And I don't know if you know about Amazon Now.
Which one is that?
Amazon Now is you log on to Amazon, you can just place an order and it's at your doorstep in 2 hours.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, that's insane. Like that's
Right.
and literally the first time I did it, I was like, I'm gonna see if this is real.
Right.
I really was. I honestly, I'll order this. Sure. I'll give you a tip. No problem. And I really thought it was a scam. I'm like, nah, it's just never gonna happen. And then an hour later, I hear a knock on the door. I'm like,
wow, really?
I'm like, you've got to be kidding me.
But that's delivery distribution, right?
Right.
So, but take it another step further. What about 3D printing? What about when you can go onto Amazon and you say, I want this pair of pants, and your 3D printer prints the pants for you? Or take it another step and say, I'm hungry right now, and the 3D printer prints a beautiful, healthy, organic meal for you.
Star Trek style, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it, what was once science fiction becomes imagination to the next generation of scientists who then turn it into reality. So when we look at science fiction, we have to realize someone's getting inspired by that sci-fi. And if somebody sits and figures out how to make this happen, this may be our future.
Well, it was just like what happened with Back to the Future 2. That came out in the 1990, and a lot of the stuff that they predicted came true. A lot of it didn't, but
sure.
There is a hoverboard. It's not like everyday stuff by Mattel.
That's the one that blows up, though, right?
No, not that hoverboard. There's an actual hoverboard that uses the same technology.
Well, levitation technology.
Right.
There are trains that work on maglev. So
it's insane.
But I think the thing is that when the way we live our lives, because we're all sort of beholden to paying our bills and whatever. I mean, we live our lives today. We imagine that the future will look like today, but a little more gadgety and a little faster, right? But we're not paying attention to the fact that those changes are approaching. How fast they get here is anyone's guess, but I think they're approaching faster than we imagine. So, to me, I see the future as a very, very different place than what exists today in 2016.
And that's basically the essence of the TED Talk, like to prepare yourself for what's coming.
Well, and so the TED Talk then takes that idea and says, that this launched me into this desire to make this film studio, in part because, so I wanted to create movies and television entertainment about these ideas, but through the process of teaching, through the process of saying, okay, well, people have great ideas. I need great screenplays. How do we get them from here to here? And I sat down and I basically reverse engineer the process. Now, people don't understand this concept very well because a lot of people think Fast Screenplay is a screenwriting course, which it's not. It's, at the end of the day, whatever technique you use, whether you use a 3-act structure or, whatever 10 other formulas are out there. Everyone goes through the same process. The process is start with the idea, turn it into a story, get it on the page, shape it, reshape it until it's solid, make it a compelling read for the reader, and then connect it with the people that you're trying to reach, right? So that process is the same. That's what I basically did. But through the act of reverse engineering that process, I came to see and appreciate and realize how creativity works and how imagination works and how we harness imagination and creativity and turn it into something that satisfies our own goals. And so as you start to look at this on a, I guess, meta level, you start to realize that, well, really every person on this planet goes through that same process during creativity, right? We all witness life through a different vantage point, right? You're seeing whatever you're seeing in this moment, wherever you are. And anyone who's listening to this is seeing something completely different to what you're seeing, completely different to what I'm seeing. And our backgrounds are all completely different as well. So we interpret it differently. So in I guess, this analogy, this metaphor that I came up with is that the earth is like a giant brain and we're like individual neurons. And so when we interact with each other, we're sparking that other neuron, right? When I say something to you that resonates with you, you go, oh, wow, that's really cool. And then you incorporate it into your thinking. And then that sort of informs where you go from there. Similarly, when you say something to me or I listen to one of your podcasts and I go, oh my God, that's so amazing. Or this person's fantastic. So writing, creativity, filmmaking, storytelling is that. Right. So it's when you're trying to tell a story, when you're trying to write a script, when you're trying to make a movie, you have an idea in your head that you're trying to share with other people, with an audience, with the world. Right. You want the most people possible to hear your idea and to understand it and to connect with you and to inspire them. So it's all kind of the same thing.
So then, basically, so let's back up for a second. You have a system called Fast Screenplay. Basically, it's a system, correct?
Sorry,
because we kind of went into it first before explaining what Fast Screenplay was. Can you break down the 7 parts, or did you already the 7-part system of Fast Screenplay? And from what I'm getting, just so I understand, it's not like how to write a screenplay. It's a different kind of process to get the idea to the final end point. Is that kind of what it is?
Well, no, it's both.
Okay.
So let me back up a second. So Fast Screenplay. Fast is an acronym. So it's all capital letters, right? Focus is the F. A is for apply. S is for strengthen. And T is for tweak. So what I realized when I sat down to sort of reverse engineer this process is that writing there are 4 phases to writing. The first is to focus your ideas, where you basically take all the random ideas that you have and you focus them into a specific story, right? One, you choose and shape your story. Now, once you have your story, you have to get that onto the page. You have to write it, which I call the apply phase. You're applying that story plan that you created, right? So there's your first draft. Once you have your first draft, you have to rewrite. You have to strengthen it to make it in sync with your intentions. So make it the best story that it can be. Once you've got it to be the best story, then you tweak the words, you polish it, you refine it so that the reader's experience when they read your script is it's a page turner. It's compelling. They want to go through this experience. So focus, apply, strengthen, tweak is the writing process. So about, 10 years ago now, I wrote a book called Writing Fast, How to Write Anything with Lightning Speed, which you can get on Amazon. The Kindle version is really cheap. Anyway, so but that's the 4-part writing process. Now, what I also realized was that if a writer goes out and starts just writing scripts, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're writing something that a producer like me could use. right? So the only way that they're going to write something that I can say yes to is if they write something that is aligned with my needs, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean they have to write for me. Maybe they write something that's so amazing, I want to make that film. One way or another, though, we have to be aligned in order for me to say yes, and for us to move forward and make the film. So what I realized was you could actually add a phase before this writing process, which I call the setup phase, which prepares you for the process and sort of pre-aligns your imagination with the needs of the producer. So that when you start the process of writing, your brain is serving up material to you that is in sync with producers' needs, right? So that you're not sort of going off way on a tangent. But it's still your creativity. It's still whatever it is you want to write.
Right.
So then you go through that process. Once you're done, you're going to need to get notes and feedback. You're going to need to see how your work is interpreted and responded to by other people. So we have what I call the alignment phase. And that's basically you're sending your work out for notes and feedback. And how do you interpret notes and feedback? So many writers, and I've given notes over so many years now that writers drive me crazy because they take notes personally.
Yep.
They say,
I know.
how dare you not appreciate and respect the brilliance of what I wrote? And you're like, okay, I'm giving you a note telling you what the reaction to your work is. And rather than taking that and adapting your work so that it serves your goals, you're going to reject the note out of hand and take it like I've killed your baby, right? So
ego.
Ego really gets in your way at that stage of it. Because at the end of the day, we all write crap.
Mm-hmm.
I've written so much crap, it's not even funny, right?
right.
Arguably, maybe the things I'm talking about right now are true. But that's for someone else to decide.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the goal is not good or bad. Mm-hmm. The goal is creating something that is effective at what you're trying to get across. So the alignment phase helps you see what other people are getting and then adapt what you've created so that they get what you want them to get. Mm-hmm. Also teaches you the skill of adapting your work to the needs of a producer if you want to go that road, right? So then the final phase is the payoff phase, which is where now that you have this script, now that it's been through this process, now that it's aligned with, so you know they like it, it's what they want, how do you then connect with the producer, and how do you identify what producers, and how do you then connect with them? So the whole system of fast screenplay, the 7 phases: setup, focus, apply, strengthen, tweak, alignment, payoff. It's huge.
Yeah, of course. No, it's absolutely.
So it probably takes about a year to learn the process. Mm-hmm. But I also have then subsequently distilled each of those steps so that once you get the whole process, you can then condense it and you can move through it and gradually make the process intuitive, which is what leads to mastery. Right. So it's sort of this thing that looks daunting at the start, but it's really not, because most writers think they know all this stuff and they really just don't. I mean, even intermediate, even advanced writers, to be honest with you, there are things throughout the system that they're like, oh, I never even thought of that before, or this fills in a gap of something that I didn't know before. So my point in creating the system wasn't to teach screenwriting. I have no interest in becoming some screenwriting guru. This is not like, I'm at the end of this road. I don't want this to be my life from here. I created this because if you're in Australia and you can't find scripts and you don't have discretionary funds to pay writers to just develop stuff, which may or may not end up getting produced, because that's wasted money. And when every dollar counts, you can't spend that money. I basically needed an in-house script development system like a studio might have, but out of house, right? Like I needed something that anyone could go, start here, go through this, deliver something that we could make. So the idea was, hopefully through this process, we'll end up getting scripts and stories, some of which will be aligned with what we want to make, some of which writers will go off and find other producers. But then in theory, we'll gradually, as more people discover it, be able to make our 3 to 6 films a year. and then hopefully change the world.
So then basically, what you created Fast Screenplay was a selfish reason. You just want better screenplays.
That's pretty much, yeah. I want better screenplays, and I don't want to have to write them myself.
Exactly. So then, since you've already said you've read tons of scripts, thousands of probably over your lifetime, what are the most common mistakes you see with first-time screenwriters?
Seriously, it's across the board. You have problems of idea selection. There's like people will have an idea and the kernel of the idea is good, but then they've turned it into a story that just doesn't really make any sense or is not the best expression. Look, think about the reasons why you watch a movie and you don't like the movie. I mean, how many movies do you watch where you go, that was awesome, like that was fantastic? Like it's actually few.
I just actually watched last night for the first time the Grand Budapest Hotel.
I love that movie.
And I just loved it. Like my wife and I sat there and go, it's so unique. It's such a well-told story. It's so beautiful to look at. It's just a gorgeous film. And that's and it's rare. And it's rare to actually hear yourself say, that was a good movie. And then, of course, I saw Spotlight and The Big Short and a bunch of the Oscar-nominated films as well this year. But just Grand Budapest, we just have never got around to it. I was like, my God, that was really a good film.
Well, and so if you think about then all the other films that you've seen that you sort of go, well, it was good, or it was okay, or you walk away going, geez, that was terrible. Like the reasons there are many different reasons for that. But now think about this as screenplays where you're going to have the same reaction. You're not going to like every screenplay that you read, even if a screenplay might be good. I mean, there are some awards contenders this year that it's not my thing.
Right. Of course.
I'm not into it. So we have that. You have writers don't grasp the essence of the character transformation. I mean, stories are about a character or a situation or something changing. So what changes? If that change happens too fast or too slow, or it's not plausible, or it's just not handled very well, all that can be problems. You have problems of dialogue, you have problems of structure,
grammar.
But structure, I want to be clear, just because it's not 3-act structure does not mean it has problems of structure. I think there's over-reliance on the 3-act structure. I've got a video series that I'm working on at the moment should be up end of February or so on the YouTube channel, but that addresses why our reliance on the 3-act structure is maybe a little too extreme.
Right.
That's one story form, but at the end of the day, a film structure has to be right for it. It has to be right for what you're trying to say and how you're trying to say it and the point and purpose that you're trying to get across.
Well, yeah, like watching Pulp Fiction in a different structure. Like if you did a proper 3-act structure in chronological order, that movie doesn't have the same zing.
Absolutely, that's absolutely true. So when I say that most films have structural problems, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not adhering to 3-act though. So but yes, structure is a huge problem for a lot of writers, and also just writing style is a big thing. People don't necessarily appreciate, but if you're reading lots of scripts, there's something to be said for like a really great writing style, like something that just pops off the page and implies more than it says. There's screenwriting requires an economy of words that writers often don't fully appreciate, where in some ways you want to use 3 words instead of 10. But you want those 3 words to say more than the 10 would have. Right. So there's a lot in the white space. There's a lot there's a lot that's implied, that should be implied in the way a great screenplay reads. And if writers can really learn to play with that, it'll make their scripts jump out a lot better. I know there's some screenwriters that when you read, because I've read so many bad screenplays in my life, mine included. I'm in the same boat. Yeah, mine included, without question. Some of my earlier efforts are like, oh my god, some rough stuff. But then you read Shane Black's old stuff, like Lethal Weapon and It can be a bit hammy, but yeah,
no, obviously for the time period, but still, you can see that voice is so clear. Walter Hill, back in the day, John Milius, who was an insane writer, and of course Tarantino, and a million other writers. But when you start reading those guys, they all have very, very unique voices.
Absolutely,
and it pops right off the page. Like you read a Shane Black script, it's Shane Black. You read it, obviously Tarantino probably has the loudest of all of those voices.
Yeah, but there's a danger though also with that, because often the scripts that you find online are some of the most beloved scripts that you find online are written by writer-directors, and if you're writing a screenplay on spec, if you're not going to make your own film, then you have to be careful, because there are certain things that writer-directors will do. They'll include shots, or they'll include certain language that they can get away with because they're describing how they're going to film it. But as the writer submitting your project, trying to get a story made, you don't want to include that stuff, because you really want the creative team that is going to ultimately say yes and make your film. You want them to infuse their own creative vision into it. And so if you steer it too much from a control standpoint, then it's a turnoff to the reader. And I can't tell you how many times you read a script and it's like, okay, you think you're directing this? Right. And that's, this isn't even written well enough, let alone directed well enough,
Yeah. I was told many years ago, by many different people, like, don't put direction in a script unless you're directing it. If you're directing it, do what you want, but generally don't put like close up here, dolly in here. Like, don't do that, because exactly for that reason. Like, yeah, obviously a Tarantino movie will have that because he's going to direct it. But like, if you read, Shane Black's Last Boy Scout, which he wasn't a director back then, or Lethal Weapon, he wasn't a director back then. Those scripts they are 80s and they are what they are, but they're so well put together. I mean, and I still put up Lethal Weapon is one of the best action films.
I agree, of course.
And Die Hard. I mean, Jesus.
Absolutely. And they stand the test of time because the stories are so rich, the characters are so well written, and the pacing and the tension and the
it's masterful. It's masterful to watch. Like, considering like watching an action movie today, and then watching Lethal Weapon 1, 2, Predator, the original Predator, or Die Hard, those 80s action movies that are just. Like, you could pop them in right now and they do their job. Like, they will do their job so well. I mean, even Star Wars, for that matter, the original Star Wars. I mean, that was done in the 70s. There's not many movies that were done in the 70s that hold to today. Like, you could put Star Wars in right now. I'll put it on for my 6-year-old. And
hang on, though. Part of that is because the setting isn't the 70s.
Correct. But the storytelling is universal forever. Yeah, obviously, yeah. Well, but like The Godfather, you could put The Godfather on and it still holds very much, though the pacing's a little different than what people are used to today, especially now with the new 7-hour version being released on HBO of Godfather 1 and 2, which I'm really interested. I'm not sure if I have the time to watch that.
Well, that's the big question then. Who has the time to watch it?
Who's going to sit down and watch 7 hours of The Godfather?
I think one of the frustrating things for me at the moment, though, is that, we are technologically capable of making extraordinary stuff today.
Oh, God,
and one of the biggest, I think, letdowns is story and script development, because people are so enamored of the production process and the post-production CG and editing, all that stuff. The stuff that all you really need are the tools and you can start tinkering. When it comes to writing, we all have the tools. To start tinkering is a little harder because there's no defined shape to what it's supposed to look like. And you can write in anything. You could write on the back of a napkin at the end of the day.
Right.
It's not, what you write on, how you write is not the most important thing. What's important is taking that idea, turning it into a compelling story. And there's this almost pervasive attitude of well, I'm just going to bang out a script. I'm just going to spend 2 weeks or 3 weeks knocking out my screenplay and I'm ready to go.
All right.
And it's like, you wouldn't, I remember doing a live workshop in Melbourne, in Australia once. And this woman had attended and she was a novelist and she made, these epic fantasy novels. Like, each novel would have 800 pages. She had multiple trilogies on the bookshelf at the local bookstore, and she had come to do my screenwriting workshop because she said, in between my big 800-page novels, I usually have a month or two off, and I thought I'd bang out a script between them.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, okay. So I met up with her like 6 months later, and I said, how's it all going? She said, I was amazed to discover that it's as much work to write a screenplay as it is to write an 800-page novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
if I could just let that point sink into the minds of every writer I encounter, oh my God, life would be so much better. Because if you realize that that's the amount of effort and skill and nuance that you have to use, I think you would treat the whole thing much more seriously. And if you treat it more seriously, you're more likely to create better quality. I mean, I don't know how old you are, but
we're about the same vintage, I think.
Probably. So
you're a little younger, probably. I'm not sure.
Okay, but when we were young, we probably wrote stuff. We probably tried to make stuff. You look back at it now, and it was terrible. But new writers don't have the benefit of that, so they assume that what they're creating is great, even though, like, when I create something, if I write today, I'm assuming it's not good enough.
Right.
I'm going into it with the assumption that I'm seeing those early drafts of stuff that I wrote 20 years ago. So
what's interesting with what you're saying? I don't mean to cut you off, but what's interesting with what you're saying is it's so true, because when I started writing at the beginning or creating things at the beginning of my career, I just assumed that they were awesome.
Right.
You can't
not. I mean, that's kind of where the inspiration comes from. So you can't berate yourself and assume it's awful. Otherwise, you're never going to keep going.
No, but there's a sense of being humbling as life beats you down and the business beats you down as you go through it. And this is at every level. Mm-hmm. I feel that a certain time, like now, I sit down and create something. I don't assume all of a sudden it's awesome. I beat it up a lot more. I look at it more. I analyze it more to see if it's like I put it to the test to see if it holds up. Where at the first, like, you would just put something out there and you're like, oh look, and then the world will beat it up for you.
Absolutely.
And they'll do a great job, by the way. They do a fantastic job doing that.
But I really think it's also in how you interpret things. So if when you say the world beats you down or you get beat up for your story, on some level, all that the world is really doing and saying to you is that you're out of alignment.
Right.
You're not what you think you're trying to achieve. You haven't presented in a way that is achievable yet. And if in general, not you specifically, but we all start to look at the negatives, at the rejections, at the no's, at the criticisms. If we look at that through that filter of, well, okay, so the thing that I put out there didn't resonate. Why? I think it will help us improve. It helps us adapt, refine, because ultimately success is available to absolutely anyone who wants it.
Yep.
It really is, because all that you have to do is not give up. That's it. I like to say there's only two outcomes for screenwriters. Either you're going to see your script made into a movie, or you're going to quit. That's it. There's no other option.
Mm-hmm. No,
if someone says no, then you adapt, you refine, you keep persisting until you get it made as a movie.
I've used this example on the show before, but The Matrix.
Yes.
I heard the story of The Matrix on a documentary I was watching probably like a year ago or something. And what I found out was that the script was, so obviously revolutionary and the story was so out there that people didn't really understand it. It took so long to get it made. It took about 4 to 5 years.
Yep.
To get made. And in that time, they shot Bound. The Wachowski brothers at the time shot Bound to kind of prove that they could direct it. But during that 5-year period, they were beating the hell out of the script.
Yep.
They were rewriting it and rewriting it. So by the time they finally got to make it, that was the tightest script in the world.
Absolutely.
They beat that thing up so much. So by the time it got released into the world, the world couldn't do any more beating. They couldn't
Right.
tear it down. They've made something so structurally sound that there's there's nothing you can do to tear it down. It was just it's like Shawshank Redemption. You watch Shawshank Redemption, you just go,
flawless.
I can't say. Though anytime I feel bad, I do look up bad review Shawshank Redemption, and there are some, by the way, and I love reading them because they're just like, you idiot.
Well, this is an interesting point because ultimately, I used to use exactly that as an example in my live workshops. I would say, ultimately, there will always be people who hate what you do. There will always be people who try to knock you down, or not even maliciously. Maybe they just genuinely don't like it.
Don't float your boat,
but
right.
that's okay. I mean, if you go back to that brain metaphor analogy, not everything that you put out into the world is going to electrify all the other neurons in the system, right?
No.
It's only all that matters is that it lands with where you're trying to land it.
Exactly. Now, can you talk a little bit about this free course that you've been working on for a year, the fast story development, how to create the detailed?
Yeah, so it's a 4-part YouTube video series. So if you haven't been to my YouTube channel, check it out. There's a lot of me talking, but it's youtube.com/fastscreenplay, and there are 30 videos or something like that there at the moment, and this one is a 4-part series. So one of my biggest challenges is helping people really understand what fast screenplay is all about. So I wanted to do something that was both simultaneously really quality information people could use and run with immediately, but also something that through explaining that helps you really understand what fast then is all about. So it's a 4-part series that's called Fast Story Development: How to Create Detailed Original Stories in 1 hour. Mm-hmm. And so it's got 4 parts. And the first part is the hidden story dynamic. So as I'm reverse engineering this process, I'm looking at the 3-act structure. Why does it work when it works? Why doesn't it work when it doesn't work? And I realize that there's this sort of hidden story dynamic underneath it all, sort of what I call the building block of all storytelling. But that building block then also applies to, infinitely beyond just storytelling. It's almost like the building block of anything that we choose to do, which means you can actually apply it to story development as well. So in part 2, it's called How to Grow Stories Organically, where you basically start with an idea and you more or less just grow it organically into a compelling screen story. Mm-hmm. So I walk you through that. Now, once you've walked you through that, then part 3 is how you can do that entire process in 1 hour. So I walk you through that. And then part 4 is why you'd even want to do this, why speed actually turns out to be the key to writing success. Mm-hmm. So each one's like about 10 minutes, a little less than 10 minutes long, okay. And they're full of animation and all this stuff, which is what has been taking me so long. Firstly, nailing it down so it the pacing and all the normal stuff. Make sure that it's effective and entertaining, but also that it is legitimately helpful. I think all 4 episodes are just packed with stuff that people will be able to use immediately, whether they continue on to Fast Screenplay or whether they go off and do their own thing. My goal has never been to be a screenwriting teacher. So ultimately, if you don't join me, that's not the end of the day for me. Fast is not about making a profit. All proceeds that come into Fast get reinvested into Fast to make it bigger and faster and to make it, expand it
exponentially, as you said.
Yeah, exponentially, eventually, yeah. So I want to make my money off of the movies that I make eventually, right? So I don't take a salary from Fast or any of that stuff. That I really want people to do Fast because it's going to help them get where they want to go.
Fast.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Ultimately, fast has multiple meanings. There's the idea of writing it fast, but really there's no point in writing something fast if it's crap, right? So The only fast screenplay actually refers to the speed at which the screenplay reads. So when I, as a producer, if I'm looking at a screenplay to evaluate it, if it's a slow read, there's no way it's going to be bought. It's just not going to happen. Right. Like if it's a fast read, that means it's a page turner. That means it's grabbed me. It's pulled me in. I'm there. I want to see what happens next. So a fast screenplay is a screenplay that reads fast. It's a screenplay that people want to find out what happens next for. That's what everyone wants to write. That's what you should want to write. Now, writing that fast requires mastering a whole lot of skills and nuances and details, character structure, theme, setting, all that stuff, right? So to master it, it's going to take a little bit of time. So you go through the fast screenplay system, which is the acronym, which is the system and the process itself.
Well, we come to the part of the show that I ask the same 3 questions to all of my guests. So these are the toughest questions you'll ever have. So be prepared yourself.
I didn't listen to other ones to prepare. So this is new to me.
Okay. What is the lesson that took you the longest to learn in life or in the film business?
The lesson that took me the longest to learn. That's a good question.
Thank you.
Do you often have people stumped looking at the wall?
For a second, but it comes to them.
I think the probably is that I'm enough.
Yeah, that's an answer I've heard from other guests as well.
Look, it's funny because all along, and I often attribute it to growing up trying to be an actor in LA. You really, I mean,
it was an actor. It was an actor who said that, by the way.
As a kid, it doesn't surprise me. As a kid, I went to probably, without exaggeration, 1,000 auditions, and I probably booked about 50 parts, and that's a lot of rejection, right? I'm too thin. I'm too fat. I'm too tall. I'm too short. I'm too good looking. I'm ugly. I'm all that
everything,
stuff, right? So on some level, I always attributed it to that I hadn't felt like it was okay to express my creative core. And so through teaching writing, I think it was only through teaching writing. I never wanted to be a writing teacher. I never would have imagined back then that's what I would be doing today. But in many ways, through doing that, it's helped me realize and appreciate. No, because I see the insecurities in every single person, every writer. You can see the insecurities, and it's like, no, just trust it, trust this, trust you. If you trust, I always tell people, if you can trust me, you can trust my system. That will turn into a trust for yourself. And so, in some ways, I'm trying to convey that very lesson to everyone that I teach.
Good answer, sir. What is your top 3 films of all time?
See, that's always a killer.
Yeah. It could be just the ones you've listened that could come to mind today.
Well, I think it's hard to go past Shawshank Redemption just because it's such a flawless film.
Right.
It's a beautiful piece of filmmaking. Here's the thing. I don't know that I could say of all time because I find value in even crappy films.
Of course, I do too. Like there's some like 80s schlock that I'll watch, and I love watching Commando. Like Commando is awesome.
Yeah,
but it's a horrendous film. It's horribly structured. There's cardboard cutouts that are being blown up as soldiers. I mean, it's a horrible film. But I love it. So yes, I completely feel. So just 3 favorite films that really tickle you.
Well, I'll tell you one that I saw recently. I don't know if I would call it as an all-time favorite, but I loved it. It's a tiny little indie film called Coherence.
Okay, I haven't heard that one.
Since you're an indie film podcast, I think your listeners would probably love this film. It's made on a tiny budget. I don't even know what like micro budget. And it's just such a cool idea, and it's really well executed, and it shows you what can be done. And it's also sci-fi in a cool sort of way that I like. I don't want to say too much about it because it actually gives away
sure
sort of the core premise of it. But have you seen a movie called Primer?
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's not like Primer in that sense, but it's that low budget indie thing where they've
That's
done
real low
something
budget,
really, really cool.
Oh, very cool. Coherence. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge sort of time travel and sci-fi nut. I love those kinds of stories. So
Back to the Future, obviously.
Back to the Future is there's another flawless film. There are some films that literally they are flawless. You can't
pick it apart.
Nothing you would change, even down to the twitch on the actor's face. Like it's just flawless. So
those are three right there. I don't want to beat you up too much.
But I have a very wide variety of. I like obscure films and foreign. You know what another one is? Great one is Cinema Paradiso.
Oh, I love Cinema Paradiso. Yeah, if any film lover, any movie lover.
Yeah.
Would love,
well, maybe that's it.
That.
Yeah.
You just got
film lover.
Yeah, as a film lover, you just watch that. And you just go, "Aww."
I'll tell you another good one is Living in Oblivion.
Oh, I love Living in Oblivion.
Anyway, so we're gonna get onto that.
Yeah, if you're a filmmaker, everyone out there, you must look for a movie called Living in Oblivion. I'll put it in the show notes.
Oh my!
It is
Steve Buscemi, early Steve
Buscemi. It's a movie about making movies, and
and Peter Dinklage has the greatest bit part in the history of time.
And my favorite part one of my favorite parts is when the grip pulls out the screenplay and gives it to the producer.
Exactly.
He's like, I have this screenplay I've been working on. And I'm like,
can I tell you how often that happens?
Oh my God. But he carries the screenplay in his back pocket. That's what I remember. It was so vividly. It's like, he's just like busted out and gives it to him. State and Maine is another great one.
State and Maine is fantastic.
State and Maine is another great movie about movie making is absolutely brilliant. Who was that? Mamet, right? That was Mamet, wasn't it?
Mamet, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Alec Baldwin's the actor.
Oh, so brilliant.
It's wonderful.
And then, can you name one really underrated film?
We probably did there a few. I'll tell you know what I'm going to go on record as saying: Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
Very underrated film, is it? No spoilers, but go ahead.
That movie has gotten a lot of flack from especially from industry people or people who are saying that it's just a ripoff of A New Hope, and that it's not. Here's the thing about that movie.
I love that you've called this the most underrated film. I love it. Only because I know there's a lot of haters about that film. But you're going to look at this film after the next two come out and see brilliance in The Force Awakens that you can't see right now. Because one of the whole sort of principles upon which everything I do is built is the notion of setup and payoff. Yeah. I believe that is sort of the core of it all, right? So everything is either setup or payoff. And that movie is setup, and it's fantastic. It's just going to pay off in amazing. I've always been a Star Wars fan. I didn't like the prequels, but I'm not a geek fan. I'm just an appreciative fan. That is I'm just so excited about what they've done with that. And where they're going with the whole thing.
And I think it gets derided especially from a screenwriting standpoint, because everyone's only looking at the similarities to A New Hope, and they're not appreciating why those similarities are likely to be there.
Yeah, look, I am actually, it's a very well documented Star Wars full blown geek.
Okay, there you go.
So
do you know things like the ring theory and all that?
No, I'm not that. I don't go that deep, but I carry Yoda close to me at all times.
Okay.
Be with you.
You see, he's always with me at all times. So I'm a
that is more geek than me.
It is much more. I have a life size Yoda here in my office. I've had him for 12 years.
That's pretty cool. Actually,
yeah. I've had him. Yeah. I don't want to go down the geek road because I could go hard, really, really quickly. But the thing is, I saw the movie and I loved it, and I'm a big fan of it, and I can't wait to go see it again. But I just enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the trip and the whole thing that JJ did with it, and he did it so nicely and so tightly. And there is a lot of haters out there, but I don't personally care. And I know there's a lot of, but there's more lovers than haters because it's made $2 billion.
No, I mean, look, there are, and that movie will be just fine whether it's got me as its defender or not.
Exactly.
But only because the sort of circle that I've been playing in for a while is the screenwriting and screenwriting education stamp, all that sort of thing. Within that world, it gets consistently bashed, and I think it's just so unfair because it's far more remarkable than it appears to be on the surface. It's also just a great ride. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, it's just
that's icing on the cake. But underlying that is quite a stunning achievement in my opinion.
And that he's created probably one of the best female heroes in the heroine in the last 20 years, if not longer. Yeah, because she's amazing. Ray's character, that character is absolutely remarkable.
Well, and I think there will be some cool reveals.
Yeah,
in future episodes.
We won't go down too far. But and going the same route where you were talking about the screenwriters kind of snubbed their nose at it. They also snubbed their nose at Titanic, and they also snubbed their nose at Avatar. And as Avatar is just Fern Gully, it's just Dances with Wolves.
But so that actually brings up a really interesting point because I'm also a fan of Avatar. I think they're mistaking the mythological structure for copycatting, right? Right. So in the hands of a hack writer, a truly hack writer, he would copy Fern Gully, and it would not have the same resonance as Avatar does. But what Cameron has done, Cameron's an exceptional film. I mean, not just box office successes,
he's
but
an amazing filmmaker.
He actually is really good at what he does.
Yes,
and he's another one that gets derided a lot. Which is, by the way, this doesn't. I'm not trying to imply that I'm only about the blockbustery kind of writing. I love obscure cinema and experimental.
Living in Oblivion, those. I mean, that's a very small movie. But
I think you have to respect. I always judge something based on what is it that they were trying to achieve, and did they achieve it effectively? So by that, if you look at a screenplay or you look at a story through that filter, a lot of these things that look to be simplistic or plagiaristic or copycat are actually not. They're using the mythological structure in a completely original way. And so, Avatar is if you had done this podcast back then, I probably would have said Avatar is the most underrated. So I think it's important for writers and filmmakers in general to understand the big mythological structures. To understand, most people don't understand the 3-act structure. They understand where the things happen, but they don't understand why the things happen where they happen. So that's what leads to hackism. That's what leads to people copying something ineffectively.
Right.
But if you understand the why behind all of it, you can use the structures to your own advantage, or you can play around with the structures and come up with something new and different in a way that is also effective.
Jeff, I won't take up any of your time. We've geeked out a little bit too much. Hopefully the audience didn't mind, but there's some good knowledge in that geek out as well. So hopefully somebody learned something today.
That would be nice.
So where can people find you, sir?
Probably the easiest place is to go to fastscreenplay.com or the YouTube channel, youtube.com/fastscreenplay, or just Google my name or Writing Fast or Fast Screenplay.
Great. And I'll have links to everything we've discussed in the show notes as always, guys. So
sounds good.
Jeff, thank you again so much for taking out the time, man. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. I had a great time.
I hope you guys learned something from that episode. Jeff was a ball to talk to, man, and we did geek out a bit on the show, so please forgive us, but I think there's some knowledge that got mixed in there somewhere with all that geeking out. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you need the show notes, just head over to indiefilmhustle.com/BPS015. And if you haven't already, just head over to screenwritingpodcast.com and leave us a good review. It really helps the show out a lot. It is a new show, and every review helps us in our iTunes ranking. So please go leave us a 5-star review. I really, really appreciate it. And as always, keep on writing, no matter what. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Bulletproof Screenplay podcast at bulletproofscreenplay.com. That's BULLETPROOFSCRENPLAY.com.
Mattress Firm's 4th of July sale has been extended. Get a free adjustable bed base, 2 free memory foam pillows, and a free mattress protector when you take home your new bed for just $7.99. That's a value of over $850 absolutely free. Plus, save up to $400 on the best mattress brands store-wide. Hurry in, your budget stretches further at Mattress Firm.
Offer valid with qualifying purchase. Restrictions apply. Valid at participating locations only. For offer details, visit mattressfirm.com/sale.
Hi, it's Jamie, Progressive's Employee of the Month, 2 months in a row. Leave a message at the... Hi, Jamie. It's me, Jamie. I just had a new idea for our song about the Name Your Price tool. So when it's like, tell us what you want to pay, hey, 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 and the trombone goes, wah, 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 and you say, we'll help you find coverage options to fit your budget. Then we just all do finger snaps while a choir goes, savings coming at ya, savings coming at ya. Yes? No? Maybe? Anyway, see your practice tonight. I got new lyrics for the rap break.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.